We're here to talk about miracles. And to begin with, I think it's important for us to settle on what we mean by a miracle. For example, if I consider Moses parting the Red Sea, assuming that actually happened, is that a miracle? Maybe, maybe not. All right, let's go to a different end of thing, perhaps something that Mark is a little more expert in. What about the Big Bang? The start of the universe, assuming that actually happened. Was that a miracle? Okay, well let's move to another area of expertise. What about this? The Cubs winning the World Series? Was that a miracle? I suspect the answer might depend on whether you are from Ohio or Illinois here. So because the term miracle gets used in so many different ways, I think it's important for us to settle on what we mean by this. And so for the purposes of what I'm going to talk about tonight, I'm going to use this definition of a miracle. I'm going to say that a miracle is a significant action by a supernatural agent within the natural order. And so the parting of the Red Sea, assuming that actually happened, probably a miracle. The Big Bang, maybe a miracle, maybe not, depends how the Big Bang actually happened, whether there's some evidence of action by a supernatural agent. The Cubs winning the World Series, I'll leave that to you to figure out whether it fits this definition of miracle. Now, as a Christian, I'm up here to defend the pro-miracles side of the discussion, and that seems reasonable because probably more than any other religious tradition, Christianity relies on miracles. But at the same time, I'm also a scientist, which means I devote a large portion of my waking hours to studying this natural order here. I try to catalog the rules and laws that nature obeys. And so the popular view seems to be that if a scientist like me is a Christian, that means I must approach Christianity somewhat like Thomas Jefferson. So Thomas Jefferson, if you will recall, rather famously created his own version of the Bible by going through the Gospels line by line and removing, and I mean like with a razor, removing any passage that had to do with anything that looked miraculous or supernatural. And then he pasted the remaining things together, and he called that his Bible. And now the popular view is that scientists must approach Christianity in this Jeffersonian way. We must approach it with our razors out, ready to remove these embarrassing miracles from the pure and reasonable center of our faith. And so it's my task to explain why this Jeffersonian approach may not be the only way or the right way for scientists to approach faith. And to begin with, I want to emphasize that for me, scientific inquiry hasn't proved any threat to my own faith. This is something that actually Mark and I will have some consonance on. For me, in fact, scientific evidence quite consistently supports the idea that God exists. The fact that there are natural laws suggests the existence of a being, a rational being, who conceived those laws. The diversity and complexity of life suggests the existence of an architect who might care about those living things. The fact that there is something rather than nothing suggests there was someone who created all that we see. And indeed, one of the joys that I have in studying the natural sciences is the joy of learning more about that creator and what he has done. And I'm constantly discovering that he is bigger and grander and more majestic than I imagined. But I don't think that many people have a problem with belief in God. Just believing that God exists is okay. The problem comes when believers start claiming to know very specific things about God. Like when Christians say things like, Jesus Christ is God's only begotten Son. That's when the trouble starts, because what possible evidence could there be for a truth like that? Such an extraordinary truth claim would require extraordinary evidence, would it not? And in Christianity, we do have that kind of evidence in the form of miracles. Christian accounts of Jesus' life contain any number of miraculous events, not the least of which is the account of his resurrection from the dead. And these miracles would certainly constitute extraordinary evidence if they are true. Because while it's one thing to say that science allows for God, it's quite another to say that science allows for miracles. Hasn't the advent of modern science disproven all these primitive miracle stories? Or to put it another way, doesn't science eliminate the possibility of miracles? Well, to give the quick answer to this, the answer is no. Science does not eliminate the possibility of miracles. And I think that real misconception here comes from conflating two different ideas. And those are the ideas of a miracle, as we've defined it, and a superstition. So a superstition is the belief that one physical event causes another physical event in a way that runs contrary to reason and observation. So a superstition would tell me that if I break a mirror, I'm going to have 7 years of bad luck. Not 6 years, not 8 years, 7 years. And the thing about superstitions is that we can test them. So, we can observe someone, and if they break a mirror, we can see if they actually have 7 years of bad luck. Or we could have them break a hand mirror and see if it's still 7 years, or maybe you only get 6 months because it's a smaller mirror. Or maybe we could have somebody break several mirrors at the same time and try to study how bad luck scales with the number of mirrors that you break. These are all things that we can test, and historically speaking, science has played an extremely important role in expunging superstitions from religious thought and practice. Because science can disprove these things because, by assumption, superstitions are reproducible. Every time you break a mirror, it should bring you bad luck. Miracles, by contrast, are typically identified specifically because they are not reproducible. So if I take the example of Jesus walking on the water, if that happened, we would identify it not as a superstition, but as a miracle, specifically because we are unable to reproduce this phenomenon. Every one of you could try right now to go out and walk on Lake Michigan. I would advise before you did that, though, that you learn how to dog paddle, because I would predict that those swimming skills would come in very useful very quickly. And the fact that miracles are irreproducible is important because science finds its basis in reproducibility. So a typical scientific observation might be something like this. I might tell you that if I mix elemental potassium with water, I get what chemists call a vigorous reaction, looking something like that. Now this might be something that I only saw one time. But if I say this in a scientific context, the implication is that if I did it again, I would see the same result. And that if you did the same reaction, you would see the same result. And that if I assign this reaction to my freshman chemistry lab, every one of them should see the same result. It's the reason that I can take points off if they don't see that result. So science deals with reproducible observations, but the requirement of reproducibility also makes science incapable of proving or disproving a miracle, because the miracles are not reproducible. A miracle is something that happened one time, in one place, in one set of circumstances, and as long as we stipulate that these are irreproducible outliers, then the existence of a miracle doesn't have anything to say about the huge body of knowledge on reproducible phenomena that science gives us. Now at this point I want to emphasize that not all irreproducible events are miracles. If you come up to me after your chem lab and you tell me that you got 115% yield on your reaction, that is indeed irreproducible, however, not a miracle. Irreproducibility is a necessary and important qualification for a miracle, but it's not sufficient. And so based on this, according to science, technically speaking, yes, miracles could happen. But have they happened? Have we ever seen a miracle? Well, we can certainly find historical evidence for miracles, say the miracles of Christianity, where there are eyewitness accounts, there's ripples of the effect that those miracles had in the lives of the people who claim to observe them. But fundamentally, I don't think the problem that most of us might have with miracles is one of evidence. There is evidence, but the main problem that we have, particularly in Western society with miracles, is not with evidence, but with plausibility. You see, the consensus seems to be that we can talk about strange events that happened 2 or 3 or 4,000 years ago, but ever since science came along, we just don't see any evidence for miracles anymore. So the idea is that if I was to plot the frequency of miracles over time, oh wow, that's somehow that picture didn't turn up very well. So this says frequency of miracles, and that's time, and I like plots. So the idea seems to be that, well, back in creation there were a lot of miracles, and then here's the Exodus, the Jews getting away from Pharaoh, there were some miracles then, and then there were some prophets, and then there was a silent period, and then Jesus is born, there's a lot of miracles, and then it decays down, and there's just no more evidence of miracles now. And the fact that we don't apparently see any miracles, the data that we have suggests that those ancient miracles are really pretty implausible. And so I want to tell a story, and I hope the pictures in this story turn out better than that picture. So, let's see. Oh good, yes. Okay, so these are a couple of pictures of my son, Peter. And when he was 3 months old, he started having some health problems. So he started having some small purplish red marks started appearing all over his body. So you can see some of them there on his leg and there on his elbow. He also started getting bloody noses. He had a blood vessel burst in his eye. And so we took him to Children's Hospital in Boston, one of the premier children's hospitals in the world, and they ran some tests. And what they discovered was that Peter had an autoimmune condition known as Evans syndrome. So his body was mistakenly identifying his platelets and his red blood cells as pathogens and killing them off. And so the result was that he was both dangerously anemic and also prone to bruise or bleed at the slightest injury. So all of these little purplish red marks are what are known as petechiae. They're small bruises, just all over. And that was bad news. But the worst news was that there is no cure for Evans syndrome. The doctors were confident that they could manage his symptoms. They were sure that they could prolong his life, but he would always be sick. And this was obviously difficult for my wife and I to hear, and so we prayed. We said, God, we'd really like it if you would heal our son. And we asked our friends to pray for a miracle. Being pragmatic people, we didn't put all our eggs in one basket though, so when the doctor said we should put him on immune suppressants, we did. And they worked. So here's a picture of him. It's a blurry picture, but he's still cute and blurry. He's about 9 months old in this picture. He's still sick. His immune system is still malfunctioning, but the immune suppressants have kicked in. They're controlling his symptoms. He looks pretty normal. But around this time, we took him in for his monthly blood test to make sure that things were working. And a strange, oh, hey, no, it looks nice. And he passed. He passed his blood test. Now, I'm a scientist, and I know that people can screw up tests all the time, so I said, probably the lab tech messed it up, or maybe the immune suppressants were interfering with things. So we took him off we weaned him off his medication and brought him back for a test a month later, and he passed again. And here is a picture of Peter at the age of 1. He's on the left there, his big sister's there. Here he is at the age of 2, helping to shovel. Here he is at 3, sharing a drink with his dad. Here he is at his 4th birthday party, which was a pirate theme. Here he is last Easter at 5 with his sister. And I show you these pictures because every year they run the blood test, and every year he passes. He was sick, there was no cure, we prayed, and he got well. There's certainly some evidence that this was a miracle. Now I understand and I have evidence, I have photos, I have eyewitness testimony, I have lab results. I understand that, for you this may or may not be enough information for you to be convinced that this was a miracle, but there is evidence here. And there's evidence for other modern events that might be considered miracles. And the important point about that evidence is that I feel that it raises the plausibility of these ancient miracle accounts. See, based on scientific observation, you could say that, well, yes, miracles are technically possible, and based on the evidence that we see, you could even make the case that they are potentially plausible. And the ability of God to reach across this gap and intervene in nature is very important to me, because I have noticed a flaw in my character. And the flaw is this: I have many high moral maxims that I believe in, things like do unto others as you would have others do unto you, tell the truth, turn the other cheek. I believe these things are true, and yet I am constantly disappointed by my inability to live up to those principles. So you could take, for example, prayer. So I think prayer is very, very important. Email, by contrast, not quite as important to me. But if you were to ask me how many times a day I pray versus how many times a day I check my email, I would not answer the question because the answer is embarrassing. I check my email far more often than I pray. You see, what I need is not just to learn the truth, to find out what I think is right, or to know how many bones there are in the human body. What I need is a truth that will change me, that will change the way that I am. Truth that can help me to be the person that I think I ought to be. And a belief in a watchmaker God doesn't really help me accomplish this transformation. If God just set the universe in motion and then hung out a sign that says, be back in 25 billion years, then I'm stuck. Whatever I am is whatever I am. And most religions are even less help on this point because they tie our acceptance by God to our ability to accomplish a certain set of tasks or adhere to a certain set of rules. It's only in Christianity that God reaches across that gap and provides the means for us to change who we are. Because in Christianity, the same God who set the universe in motion, who ordained the natural laws, that same God provides for us the means of our salvation. Because Christians believe that when we place our faith in Christ, then the person of Jesus comes to live in us. And fundamentally, what I believe in is the power of that relationship to change me, to change who I am. It is the action of a supernatural agent within the natural world. It is a miracle. And so yes, I'm a scientist who works in and through the natural laws, but I have hope. I'm a scientist who understands how God works in and through the natural laws, but I also have hope because God has intervened in those natural laws to change me.